Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session, or actually the second session, but the inaugural series for the 2022 Student Environmental Coalition Environmentalism in Action Speaker Series. My name is Jake Lange, and I've had the honor of serving as the chair of SEC while we planned this event, and I am so thrilled to kick off today with our, sorry, I'm looking at last week's script. A little bit of professionalism right there, my apologies. But so through the kickoff today with our Law, Business, and Government session presented by T.O. Bowman and Eric Pollard. This series was developed as a result of feedback indicating that students wanted to learn more about how they can take their interests in environmental issues and apply them in their careers. We hope, therefore, that you walk away from today with a better understanding of how those working in government mainly, as well as legal and business pursuits, can better effectuate environmental outcomes from their positions and how you can follow suit someday. I'll very briefly introduce our presenters. They didn't want me to read off long bios. So T.O. Bowman is with the Office of Sustainability at the City of Oklahoma City, and Eric Pollard is with the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, I believe specifically their Clean Air and Cities Coordinator. Is that all correct? Okay. In that case, that's enough out of me. I will just go ahead and hand it off to T.O.
Okay, thank you, Jake. You all see in the right slide, the title slide there, very good. Okay, as Jake mentioned, my name is T.O. Bowman. I'm the program planner that leads the sustainability office here at the City of Oklahoma City. So I've got several slides to go through. Some are very quick and, kind of go through some data and stuff like that of aspects of our job. But the main thing I'm going to cover is kind of municipal sustainability issues broadly that we see here in Oklahoma City, and look specifically at Oklahoma City's context, our geography, the way we develop our economy, and very much so our climate and the way that it's changing. So there we go. Talking about Oklahoma City in any way, it's important to note the size. We are 621 square miles. That's half the size of Rhode Island, and this is a graphic that our Public Information and Marketing Office put together. We're bigger than New York, bigger than Los Angeles, and all of these cities fit inside of Oklahoma City. So Buffalo and Miami combined could fit inside of our Ward 3. However, you could note the populations, and definitely the populations of New York and Los Angeles. There's quite a discrepancy in population density. So we have about 1,000 people per square mile, whereas New York City is about 27,000. So, or excuse me, quite a bit more than that. And so, once you start seeing how many people we have over how big of a land area we have, you start to kind of can imagine some of the challenges that creates. We have a few people spread out over a large amount of space that all require basic city services. But it's no accident that a city like this develops and becomes that size. In fact, we're the only state in the country that makes cities and towns rely on sales tax as its primary revenue stream. And so that forces, we want to preserve a large tax base out there. And what you're looking at here is a very old map that needs to be updated, but it does illustrate how Oklahoma City has grown. So starting at that little yellow spot in the middle, you can see how we added slowly pieces of land, but the big part is that striped spot, the big green striped spearmint looking color. Over the course of 4 years in the 60s, we added more land area than the city of Fort Worth. And again, this was to preserve this tax base, but also looking at that same data a different way, the way that our population density there in blue grew and then dropped off significantly, but we can still continue to grow as a city geographically. And so, that dip, however, in the 60s also coincided with a U.S. District Court ruling that we needed to desegregate our schools. So there was a period known as white flight, where people moved to the suburbs and out of inner cities. And it was a time where redlining was happening, where certain people, because of the way they looked, had to live in certain areas and couldn't get access to loans, couldn't get access to own property, that type of thing. And so whenever we had a giant drop in population density, it created a big gap in the amount of revenue that the city had to maintain some of those services. But we did have a giant tax base that we had preserved, which unfortunately in future years made it very difficult to get very expensive city services out to those people. Water service. So this map was developed as part of our Plan OKC planning process, and I'll get into their comprehensive plan in just a second. But you can tell if you live on the periphery, it's a little bit more difficult to have access to drinking water because it's very expensive to do anything underground in Oklahoma City or in Oklahoma in general. And so what you're looking at here is the water pumping map, kind of how we get water here in Oklahoma City. Natural water doesn't just settle where people do. We kind of have to figure out a way to get that to where it needs to be and to where the people are. And so that's the most energy intensive function of the city is, and most costly function of the city is pumping and treating water. We pull both from the northwest stretches of the state, from Canton, and from the southeast, from Atoka and now Sardis that connects. And it's hundreds of miles of pipeline that they pump up into these reservoirs or pump up into the air with booster pump stations, and then it gravity flows to the next booster pump station. So again, massive pumps pumping millions of gallons of water. It costs a tremendous amount of money to keep that and keep the amount of water we need here for everybody to be able to use. The other side of that coin is sewage service, and it somehow is more expensive than putting water infrastructure in the ground because of the way the system's designed. So, you see in these red areas, people that live there. There's people that still live there. They just may be on septic systems. And so as we start to see really dense development happening in areas where we don't have sewer service yet, that means there's a density of septic systems that could be untenable or something that needs to be managed in the future, can create groundwater issues if those systems aren't maintained. So we do rely on some levels of state government for inspections to be able to make sure that some environmental issues don't crop up in the future based on our development patterns. One of the things that the city has done is adopt a new comprehensive plan. This is the first new comprehensive plan since 1977 that looks at the city in a different way, and it was adopted in 2015. It's actually getting ready for another routine update coming up soon. So again, the resource stream, the anticipation of additional population growth was a driving force behind this plan. And we, the green OKC element is the one I call out here. It kind of identifies the environmental impacts associated with development, and then also kind of planted the seeds for what would become our first sustainability plan called Adapt OKC. And we deliberately chose to call it this because we wanted to emphasize the connection between sustainability and adaptation. But we also want to recognize that those things are different. They have different goals, end goals in mind. So you're sustaining things, you get to future generations and they can survive based on the amount of resources you have now. But if you're adapting, you're going through a dynamic process of constant refinement that seeks to constantly improve so that future generations can do more than just be alive. They can thrive under those circumstances. And some, credit rating agencies are also taking note of this. Moody's Investor Service issued this white paper in 2019 talking about it resulting in much more cost and much more risk to finance recovery if a town or a city or a state doesn't have a sustainability or adaptation plan in place. So this was a big motivator that got the attention of people around here, regardless of buy-in or not buy-in to environmental issues at all. So the billion-dollar climate disasters in Oklahoma, you can see the trend line here. It's going up. We're seeing a trend in extremely costly impacts from severe weather. That's not just the case in Oklahoma, and this is kind of where the rub's created, because everybody else is also experiencing more billion-dollar disasters across the U.S. We all go to the same pot of money for bailout money, for relief money from FEMA. And at some point, that pot is going to get smaller and smaller, and we'll be prioritizing which climate catastrophe we want to fund and how we want to fund those and which levels. So, pointing more towards things that we know are happening and things that are increasing and how we can experience impacts here in Oklahoma City. One of the things we can note just from historical weather data, this is just data, it's increasing, okay? So from 1950 to 2015, our average annual temperature is going up, but it's only going up by 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit per decade at that rate. However, I have news. I worked with the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, who gave us a report specifically for Oklahoma City. And it's projecting by mid-century, somewhere between 2036 and 2065, we're going to see an average annual temperature increase of 2.6 degrees to 5.2 degrees. So that's a decade and a half away from right now. That's not very much time. That's quite a bit faster clip than it is increasing heat at about 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So we expect extreme heat to happen a lot faster. But what that means, translating that out of, climate meteorology lingo, if you increase the average annual temperature, you're increasing the number of days that reach extremely hot temperatures. So we could see up to a month, maybe 30 more days of above 100-degree weather, which we experience about 9 of right now. So that's a significant increase, and it affects vulnerable populations. It affects the way our plants and crops grow. It affects mosquito populations and other pests. And so and anyone who has to work outside, whether that's lawn crews or city crews repairing water lines, all of these people that have to work outside are facing new risks. Our firefighters are going to face more wildfire conditions. Are we ready for that? We have the same amount of firefighters, I think, for the past 20 years, the same number of employees. And so, those are things that we need to consider and need to be looking at. This is a chart that I like to show because it illustrates the urban heat island effect. As we have more extreme temperatures, we're affected by asphalt and buildings and anything that absorbs heat throughout the day. Slowly releases that throughout the night. So you also see a little bit of a dip where we have a lot of rooftops and suburban residential, but this creates a heat dome and creates air quality issues, exacerbates air quality issues, and creates unsafe situations for those vulnerable populations that I mentioned earlier. So again, this also drives up electricity demand. And so we have a chapter in the Adapt OKC called energy productivity, because we know energy efficiency, the most energy efficient light bulb is the one that is not working. So we don't want extreme energy efficiency because we have to be productive. We still have to, one of the legs of the three-legged stool or the triple bottom line is the economy, and make sure that we are economically able to sustain ourselves in our basic city services. So again, with more extreme heat on the way, we expect an increase in electricity. And one study showed that electricity demand for air conditioning increased by 1 to 9% for every 2 degrees increase in temperature. So if you're seeing a day that normally was 88 and now it's 100 degrees, you're looking at a significant increase in demand for your electricity use. So that this may look like good news at first, hearing that we have some of the lowest electricity rates in the country. However, rates are only one part of the story. There are also fixed costs on people's bills that no one can get out of, and that is, just the cost of doing business. You have to pay that amount. So when people want to talk about really low electricity rates, we like to talk about what are the utility bills? What do the utility bills look like? Well, we do have low rates, but we do have higher uses per capita. So per person, we're using more than the national average. The national average is the black bar on these black line on the blue bars. The blue bars is the per capita use by sector in Oklahoma City versus the national average. So again, when you price something really, really low, people are going to use more of it. And in this case, it's electricity that's generated with fossil fuels. By and large, we're seeing an increase in the amount of wind power that's in there. We do still generate quite a bit from natural gas, and I think a decreasing amount from coal. So that's the concern there. But we do understand that the prices, both prices, the rates and demand are expected to go up in the future. And the reasons for that are the coming securitization from Winter Storm Uri, where we all had a giant cold snap, and it was we had utilities buying off the spot market for natural gas, and so it got extremely expensive. And then we also have a grid enhancement and modernization rate case that's at the Corporation Commission right now, that if approved by OG&E would be an increase of some level. The final number is not set, but of some level for residents' bills. So a couple of things that are coming down the pipeline that are going to tell us that electricity rates are going to be going up, as well as electricity demand. So some of the things we can do, knowing those things, is to emphasize energy efficiency for both new and existing buildings. Energy codes can help us do that with new construction. basically saying how efficient new construction needs to be. We currently have IECC 2009 adopted. So by moving to that next one at 2012, the 2012 version of that, this chart is showing that we could gain around 18% efficiency in each of the homes that we're building in terms of the gained efficiency. But then also having an energy code that's not either enforced or that's out of date allows an out-of-state developer to come in, build a really cheap building really quickly, and then hand that off to an Oklahoma City small business or homeowner, and then they're stuck with that bill for the life of the property. And so they're paying more of their bottom line into their utility costs, or in the case of a homeowner, they have a higher energy burden, so they're spending a bigger percentage of their household income on their utilities. And so energy efficiency, both at new construction and having programs to help people retrofit, are going to be very, very important going forward. Another thing we're seeing in energy related is record-breaking numbers in residential solar permits pulled each year since we started tracking this. And so we are, just through the first 2 months of this year, we already have 80 that have been pulled. And so this is, a trend that we expect to increase. And from Adapt OKC, we plan to do some things to help make it easier, both for developers and for the city ourselves to set up a criteria for assessing the return on investment for city facilities, work with the solar industry to do that, develop solar ready guidelines so people can, when they're building a new structure, they can make it solar ready to where if the economics may not work exactly like they like it now, I bet in 10 years it's going to be a little bit different and probably more favorable for solar. And so if you can put the conduit and do this stuff now, it's a lot cheaper than coming back and trying to retrofit it later. And then another thing we have that we want to do is increase educational opportunities and consumer protections information about solar. So a program that we're involved in is the Solarize OKC campaign. And so this is live now, the solarizeokc.com. This is it's a community-based group purchasing program for solar energy systems and battery storage. Right now, the coalition itself, made up of several community organizations, has an RFP, a request for proposals to solar installers to see if we can hire one or two to be able to do a number of projects. But basically, the discounts go up as the number of people sign up. And so people can get to a tiered discount. In other communities, it's been somewhere between 10 and 20% of the discounts that they can see on their home solar programs. But again, you get a free assessment at your home through this program. And again, the city sees it with this increasing activity in solar as a way to get some consumer protections out there so people know how contracting works, how utility bill escalators work, so people aren't creating fabricating a scenario in the future to make people think their system might pay off faster than it normally would. So predatory loans and lending and stuff isn't unique to the solar industry, but it is something that to be aware of any industry that is new or people haven't quite fully vetted it over a series of years. So moving to natural and built environment, where we look a lot more at the effects of the urban heat island and ways to mitigate that. You can kind of see from this map where natural resources fall in Oklahoma City, and there's a reason why they're shaped this way. As pervious surfaces and development, asphalt and the like, roads, parking lots, driveways, that type of stuff started to replace our natural environment with the built environment. It changed the way water behaves on the land and contributes to higher volumes and velocity of stormwater. And then with more heat in the atmosphere and projections showing that we're going to see more, we're going to see about the same amount of rainfall, but just in shorter and inundating rain events. And so those same projections we got from the South Central Climate Adaptation Sciences Center. The more times I say it, the better I get at remembering what all those letters mean. But so warmer atmosphere can hold water for longer, and it can hold more water, and then we dump all of that, and it creates flash flooding hazards and challenges. So anyway, the inverse of this map, the natural resources map, is kind of our impervious surfaces map, of which we did develop alongside the advent of the automobile, and so that was kind of why we went 50 years without building sidewalks or really supporting much of any other transportation mode besides the car. But it did result in a lot of parking lots. In fact, 4% of our entire area is made of the land use parking lots. That's double what bodies of water make up. That's 2%. So 4%, and it's probably bigger now from the last time that I looked at that, a bigger percentage. But again, they end up looking like this because they size parking lots under our current regulations. They size parking lots based on like kind of peak demand, that Black Friday shopping in 1994. But you know, we don't have that much demand on a regular basis. So what we have are these giant community areas in our community absorbing heat and contributing to kind of degraded stormwater quality. It's not only heating up the stormwater, but it's also adding pollution and sedimentation to it that goes again straight into our natural water system. It does not go through any treatment or anything like that. If it goes into the little gutter next to the street, it's going straight into a river or lake or stream. So that's challenging. One of the projects I'll talk about at the very end is a code update, a municipal zoning code update that we're looking at here in the planning department. One, to make our rules and regulations and our laws related to zoning match better what the vision is of Plan OKC. Right now, they're not exactly the same. And so it creates some challenges for decision makers. But through that process, we are going to be looking at parking minimums and where they're appropriate, if they're appropriate, and where parking maximums might be appropriate. And so those are all things that are going to be looked at through that process. I mentioned the inundating rain events. Well, sometimes we create those on our own through irrigating unnecessarily. And sometimes whenever it's a drought, people feel like they need to irrigate a lot. And then they see the brown and yellow from the drought on their grass, and they add more nutrients, and those nutrients just run straight off into the stormwater. And that, well, I have a little plug here first. I was weaving a narrative to get to blue-green algae, but we do have a program through the utilities department for the sprinkler system checkup. So quick plug, know anybody in Oklahoma City who is guilty of this, please put them in touch with our utilities department. Squeeze Every Drop program. One, it helps with water conservation, and two, I'm sure their lawn and plants would appreciate it to be watered right, as opposed to just be watered all the time, every single day, especially during rainfall. So when all of those nutrients and other things end up in our lakes and streams with the presence of heat and sunlight, you can get blue-green algae blooms. So slow-moving waters that are rich in nutrients occurring late summer, early fall. They produce toxins that can contaminate drinking water. They can cause problems for recreating water. So it can be a tourism deterrent, and that can last. The stigma from that can last for several years, and it can cause illness in humans and animals. So it's a nasty thing. But sometimes it happens just because of the way we're living right now, and the way that we treat our lawns and landscapes and our stormwater. This is an illustration I like to use. This is the whitewater course downtown that was built with MAPS 3 money, the Metropolitan Area Projects, which was the penny sales tax initiative, and I'll talk much more about that in just a few slides. But this really illustrates how they make a whitewater course, and it's much like the same thing that development does to land. As you add these blue blocks, it creates more rapid, more velocity in the water, and it also creates more dangerous situations in the case of flash flooding, or if you're flooding a nearby neighbor's property. But the firefighters actually use this for swiftwater rescue. So the analogy kind of holds true to the way development happens. But then we're also looking at solutions to some of those things. And again, this isn't a one-off silver bullet type of fix. This is different strategies that can be implemented to manage stormwater. So we have, it's kind of all under the umbrella of low impact development. You've heard terms like green infrastructure, where you can see there's mechanical and biological examples of this. Basically, the idea is to either slow down and or filter the water before it gets to those natural water bodies. And so if we can pull sedimentation out before it gets into our drainage system, and if we can pull out pollutants that are coming off of parking lots, maybe we can capture water, filter it using natural processes, and then hopefully improve the stormwater quality and avoid costly regulatory processes that we would get into if we exceeded thresholds. So this is an example. This is on the always forget, South Sooner Road, I want to say, Kitchen Lake, but this is a closer to home fishing lake that the Parks Department maintains. And again, did a really great job of designing the parking lot in a circular way that kind of slopes inward towards a bioswale / rain garden that collects and treats, has a drain, but it also helps collect and filter the pollution from the parking lot. One project that we got involved in with the Parks Department through a grant from AARP, their Community Challenge Grant, was to look at Memorial Park that's on Classen and Northwest 63rd in Oklahoma City. But the parking lot that is at the top of the screen here is where we're focused on. And basically we got money to help do these other two flow-through planters. They had already done the parking spaces around it as impervious parking spaces where water can pass through those and it doesn't collect on there or rush off and bring all the mulch and everything with it. But this actually allows for water infiltration. And so we had a little trash cleanup on one day as kind of a launch, but then it uses engineered soils and specific layers to be able to illustrate. And then there's a couple of signs also to help educate people who come by about what's going on at those features at their park, how they work, why they're important, and how they connect to the bigger watershed. Maps 3 I mentioned. So this is the third iteration. If you're from anywhere around the metro area, you've probably heard of MAPS or a MAPS project, but it's a terrible acronym because it stands for Metropolitan Area Projects. And so that extra S is just, it's right there. But we're collecting taxes, the collected taxes from April 2010 through December 2017, did construction on a giant downtown park, Scissortail Park, that has rain gardens. It's got, I think it's 36 acres in the upper park and 34 acres in the lower park. The lower park meaning it's divided by I-40. And so Scissortail Park, or Scissortail Bridge, is the thing that connects those two things. It uses reclaimed water for irrigation, and it has a backup 700-foot well that they've drilled there. But again, this is like right in the heart of our city center downtown to helps combat the urban heat island effect, gives respite for downtown workers or people passing by. But you know, I would be remiss if I also didn't mention that MAPS 3 included a substantial investment in sidewalks, and so helping connect. You know, a lot of those places that we spent 50 years not building sidewalks. Moving more into the trees. So in 2016, we did an assessment with the help of the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, the Parks Department did, of trees in parks. And this was an iTree analysis conducted by Davie Resource Group. And Oklahoma Forestry was also involved in this project. And so they conducted it across 134 city parks. I think there were just under 20,000 trees. They're estimated to sequester about 324 tons of carbon, which at a price of 133 per ton means that those trees annually provide about $43,000 in environmental benefits. So again, this study helps us assign dollar figures onto the ecological services that these trees are doing and that our tree canopy continues to do. And again, we don't have to pay them for it. Like once they're there, we just need to make sure they're watered until they get established, and then they're just working for us. So trees are doing a tremendous amount. Oh yeah, I've got some stats. Look at this animation. 3.6 million gallons of avoided runoff. So again, stormwater, we're talking about increases in stormwater in ways that we can help combat the challenges created by the amount of the flash flooding that's coming. Trees can be one of the biggest things that we can put in place to help control erosion, but also to suck up some of that stormwater. So this one, I hope I didn't step on Eric's toes here. This was a project ACOG was involved in and actually kind of ran this project, again, with the assistance of the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, but looked at a 536 square mile area, bigger than you know, our urbanized area and stretching outside of Oklahoma City. But effectively, they produced scenarios to where they could, or layers that will be very helpful for our planning purposes to see kind of where these trees are falling, if they're in the urbanized area, not in the urbanized area, and how much are taking up of impervious services. So again, just additional data to help inform decision making about preserving our tree canopy. Waste reduction, we're by and large looking at extending the life of the 3 landfills. There's 3 high volume landfills in Oklahoma City. That means they all receive more than 500 tons per day, which is a tremendous amount of stuff because we kind of get it from all suburbs and Oklahoma City's Oklahoma City residents as well. I apologize to everyone that I did not change the color of that font, but that says residential waste received by landfills in Oklahoma City per municipal program FY17. So FY17 is a little bit out of date. This data was kind of collected manually, so I'll do that again at some point. But by and large, this is going to be about the same every year, with the caveat that I'll get to on the next slide. So the main thing I want to focus on this slide, everything on the little purple, everything's purple on this slide. Magenta, what the light purple, this one. So this is all from the curbside. What's that? Yeah, mauve, mauve. Yeah, we'll take that. So this is all from these municipalities' curbside programs. So our bulk waste and our carts, the 96-gallon carts that they dump, that's all of that is 31% of what goes to these landfills. Everything else is just ripe for targeted strategies: commercial, office waste, organic waste, including food waste, yard waste, disaster debris. All of these things is what makes up that other 69%. The city doesn't have commercial programs. We don't offer commercial programs. And so we need to be looking at strategies that will extend the life of these landfills, because once they move out of the city, there's not going to be any land left over in the city to do it. And once they move outside of the city, that creates other problems, because now we're transporting this waste a lot further. And so that increases costs and it increases emissions. So waste is going to be a really challenging issue. I normally had a slide in here that showed the parcels, and so how a landfill grows. They acquire the parcels around it because nobody wants to live right abutting a landfill. They'll sell that land to the landfill. They'll then be able to grow wide so that they can get a permit to grow tall from DEQ. So it's just like building a pyramid, except we're not burying our sacred elders inside of it. We're burying all of our trash. So one other climate impact is cascading costs. And I like to illustrate that by this photo of my backyard. This was from October of 2020, I think, whenever that happened. But it's important to note this term climate weirding that's happening. I mean, look at all the vegetation that's still on these trees. So this happened in October. This was over the course of 3 days, we generated about half of what we sent to the landfill on an annual basis. And so that was a very time-consuming cleanup that our utilities crews and contractors had to respond to, and had to respond to quickly, because we all had stacks, 4 or 5 feet, 6 feet tall out in front of our houses, and everyone wanted it gone yesterday. Well, we got a finite crew working around a giant city trying to pick up all of the ice storm stuff. So again, it's a massive amount of tonnage that just like that, we can reduce the landfill life by another half a year right there, just from that one event that happened. Other things that make it that cause challenges. So this is an example of a preemption bill or a law now that demonstrates the challenges that municipalities face in dealing with environmental issues, even obvious ones. So this is effectively a ban on plastic bag or styrofoam bans, basically single-use plastics. We can't regulate those. Those are a petroleum product, and the state legislature thought it important after Norman considered one for plastic bags to preempt municipalities from regulating that. So just a couple anecdotes related to that. This is a photo from a cleanup in Oliver Park last summer. This is in South Oklahoma City. And behind shopping carts, do we have any guesses on what the most collected item was? That's right, it was single-use plastics. So even the things that we can see, the problems that we can see, the environmental problems we can point to and say, this is a problem in our community. Look, it is. We're banned from regulating that. Air quality, in this chapter, the takeaway is Oklahoma City drives a lot. And so avoiding emissions, both criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases, those are things that we want to do with this chapter. And 80+% of our commutes are single occupancy vehicles. That means one person in one car driving to work and back. And so we want to take those commutes. We don't see that changing, unfortunately, not drastically. But what we want to do is take those commutes and make them low or no emission commutes as much as we possibly can. It take a long time to explain this chart. This is basically how the EPA grades our air on cleanliness. If we exceed their threshold, which is the red line, that, as you can see over time, it's been going down, getting more difficult to attain. But our trend line is also going down, meaning the number of criteria pollutants and the number of things that they regulate, the pollution is going down also. But that's not because we drive less. That's because our vehicles have become much more efficient. And so that's, sometimes you can look at data, but sometimes there's a little bit more data that gives the full picture. And this is one of those situations. Another thing that we do know is that more development on the periphery of a city, especially a city that developed alongside the advent of the automobile, means that there's going to be more transportation costs and emissions associated with the households that are further away from the city center. Just to get to basic services, to get to grocery stores, there's going to be more driving involved on the periphery in general. So again, it increases the amount of money that households have to spend on transportation. This came through a couple weeks ago, and I thought it important to include. They used a bunch of anonymized, I think it's anonymized mobile phone data. Basically, they were able to determine which trips are being made and how long those trips take. So this is of all, excuse me, this is of all modes of travel. And they're saying a trip normally takes about 10 minutes, or a stay at a trip takes about 10 minutes. But basically, 52% of all of these trips are less than 3 miles. And so, we're looking at alternatives that we can have available: biking, walking, transit, connections to transit, all of those things. So nothing is going to be an all or nothing approach here, especially with sustainability or adaptation for Oklahoma City. And that's just not the way that anything operates around here. But if you can take some of those trips, take your shortest trips and make those not in your car, that can help everybody out quite a bit, and maybe save you a little bit of money too. And so, another plan that came out of Plan OKC is our first bicycle pedestrian master plan. So I thought we needed a plug in here for that too. Bike Walk OKC. I think it's going to be undergoing an update as well sometime soon. So keep an eye out for communication about that. But lots of investments going into bike lanes and bicycle infrastructure, the Better Streets, Safer City. I mean, voters have approved initiative after initiative to fund improvements to our transportation network that definitely includes bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Again, another way to make those low and no emission commutes is to look at alternative fuels. If we can get away from gasoline and diesel and more electric vehicles and CNG and things like that, can move us in the right direction. So I've got a heavy emphasis on transit here in these photos because Embark, while they began an investment kind of back, I think in 2016, they have a goal of replacing all of their entire bus fleet with compressed natural gas or electric buses by 2025. So that's going to be a very big boost. Those things are on the streets all the time. Another thing we'd love to do is work with school districts. School buses are around young, vulnerable lungs that, it's at ground level. It's just some of the obvious things that we as a community should recognize and see as easy decisions to make when it comes to the health of children. I think that's a pretty easy thing to all kind of rally behind. Also included in maps, well, not initially. So anyway, the Embark has a plan to invest in bus rapid transit. It's a funded project. It's going to go up, connect to a ton of jobs, and get people back downtown really quickly through MAPS 4. This is the slide I thought I was talking over. Through MAPS 4, which is the next iteration of the MAPS program, we have expansions funded to go both to the northeast and to the south side to Capitol Hill and Southwest Medical. So again, the transit system is continuously looking to improve, all the while still trying to reduce emissions through their low and no emissions transition there. I mentioned the code update. Here's just a little bit more information about it. We're right now kind of in that code development process. You can learn more at okc.gov/code update. And then finally, this is a picture of downtown during the Dust Bowl, and just kind of stands as a reminder that we've faced environmental and economic crises before, and we've responded to those by recognizing the cause effect of human activities, introduced public policy interventions, and just changed the way that we did things. So with that, I thank you, Jake, for having me, and I guess we'll do questions all at the end.
Thank you for that, by the way. And we can, or I had originally tried to budget time within each individual presentation slot so that if people have questions right away for you, they can.
Okay.
If you guys would prefer to do it the other way, we can, but I had budgeted a couple more minutes for questions at this point.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone
Any
have
burning questions?
Yeah. And if nobody does, I do, but I'll defer to other people first.
I don't have a question, but one comment. I loved your slide on the DOE fact of the week. I just found that, and it's actually, I can pull some relevant information that you just used for a talk I'm doing on Wednesday. So I'm just very happy to be at this presentation today. Thank you for that.
Very cool. Thanks.
I'll go ahead and ask one, and I wrote them down in the order that they were presented, but I'll skip ahead here. Looking at the tree analysis that was done, this is just something that gets talked about a lot in my circles at OU. A lot of people ask about OU landscaping stuff, so I'm just curious at the city level, while I'm no expert, does the city seek to promote new tree plantings using like Oklahoma native or Oklahoma proven species, or does it have any interest in regulating that, or?
Yeah, so I don't know if we would go as far. Well, we do regulate certain species for sure. And so, as I mentioned in the zoning code, kind of that's where all of that lives in the chapter 59 of our municipal code. And so, under landscaping regulations, it depends on the intensity of the activity next door and all of those things. But there are certain trees that are listed. There's also a document called Putting Down Roots that you can find on the city's website. Our current assistant city manager, Aubrey McDermott, authored that. And she used to be the planning director, used to work in planning for years, and has a degree from OU, I believe. And so she wrote that. It's a perfect book for deciding which tree where, and specifically here in Oklahoma, to see which ones are more resilient and more hardy for ice storms or severe weather, and then also drought tolerant and resistant, and for whichever purpose you want to use. So yes, and then as part of that code update, landscaping is going to be part of what's looked at there, and so that's going to be an even more encouragement. In Adapt OKC, we would like to pursue. We say we would like to pursue a tree preservation ordinance. We're still working on the ins and outs of that, and various cities regulate that differently. But yeah, the assessments and the data that we got from those are very valuable and just starting points. But we wouldn't be able to do some of the planning, and particularly in parks and recreation, with the amount of trees and landscapes that they maintain from public spaces. We wouldn't be able to do that without that data. So a big help that was.
Great.
And not to dive too deep on trees. I mean, we could go all day on trees, but I think one of the things, the canopy study, that one of the things we can look at, and I'll get into some of this and what I talk about, but what as citizens or residents, we're looking for people to make these decisions about where to focus on planting. I think Tio may have talked about it, but there are clear links between health outcomes and what your tree canopy looks like in your community. So, what data can we look at, and how do we target tree plantings in impacted communities, or communities that have worse health outcomes, for example. So I think the Community Foundation is looking at some of those things. The other thing I would mention is City of Edmond has I think it's a 20% figure of, if you have a new development, that you leave a certain amount of the canopy on that development. So that may be a first of its kind part of the code there, but that's something that some of our communities are looking at as well.
Yeah, I believe you're correct about that 20% figure. And I think, I'm not an expert, but one of my classes mentioned that. I think it also has to be nearly contiguous. Like, you can't really make the case for a couple of dispersed trees counting for that. It has to be, if you have like a forested area, you got to maintain that. And also, Tio, going back to what you mentioned, talking about the different cities that have different ordinances. I know that, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman who took the picture, that's the Plan OKC cover picture, came and spoke to our class, and he worked in Flower Mound, Texas, and they have some really, really strict, really interesting ones that I think would be interesting to see implemented here. But
yeah, that was Jared Martin. He works in the development services now, but yeah, doing great stuff over there.
Yeah. Did anyone else have any questions? I have a couple more written down. Happy to, trying to think in the mode of other people who maybe don't know as much about planning-y stuff and ask them. But does anyone else have any? Okay, doesn't look like it. I'll ask you one more, and then that might sort of run us into the break there, and we can close it with that one. I guess there were a couple different things that got mentioned in there. The earliest one just related to water service, sewage service. A little bit later, we talked about like the urban heat island. Various problems, or at least issues to discuss or address, which are heavily tethered to infrastructure, like the actual built environment. And often directly caused by the way we have our environment built. But just to answer some of the questions for the people who came here thinking about, the government side of it and like the political or like public interaction side of it, I guess, what would you say is the biggest hurdle to addressing those challenges? Is it the budgeting itself? Is it the actual, technical resources that we have? Or is it sometimes maybe political or interacting with people, or something else entirely?
No, that's a really great question, and it's the answer is all of it. So the short answer, I guess, is all of it. So the way that we fund most of our infrastructure work here is, because we rely on sales tax and we can't tap into a stable income like property tax, ad valorem tax. We rely on things like general obligation bonds. So we sell, basically borrowing from ourselves into the future, but someone buys it and we pay low rates based on our credit rating or based on our bond rating. And that's what the Moody's Investor Service paper can affect is, if communities aren't properly assessing risks and mitigating those or working to mitigate those, then that can be red flags on their ratings process. And so that's another piece where, with the way we fund things, so a geo bond has to be approved by voters. One happened, I believe, in 2017. One happened in 2007. Normally, they're about 10 years apart. Well, the preparation for the one in 2007 started years before that. And so, but the sales and the money didn't start coming in to do the actual projects. You're running on about an 8 to 10 year lag based on planning these projects, if you're relying on that. And so that can create, price discrepancies. We may have to, cut some ad alternate type of things. And so the process of our revenue coming in and spending it, it creates challenges in and of itself. We're also very reliant on federal funds to be able to maintain our streets. I can't believe I didn't mention this in the presentation. I say this every time. Our gas tax in Oklahoma City is so low by the time it goes through the apportionment formula that everyone thinks, oh well, I pay at the pump and the city gets some of that to maintain the roads. We've got 8,000 miles of road to maintain, and we get about $1 million every year from gas tax from the state. The county gets a substantially higher percentage of that based on how many miles of road they maintain. So the apportionment formula is a little skewed against urban areas already. We do get more from federal money to help maintain that, but it's more like to help try to keep up with what we do. We do a citizen survey every year, and time after time after time, it's fix our roads. We need better roads, like all the potholes, all these things. The road system itself, yes, it's made for cars, but it's also drainage. It's our drainage system too. I mean, it all runs, all of the water, all of the flash flooding, the freezing and the thawing, all of those things happen on this infrastructure that's supposed to last 50 years. Well, since when we last touch a road, in theory, we'll be coming back in 50 years to touch it again and repair it again. There has been some analysis done internally. I don't think we have enough people and or contractors and or money to stay on a cycle that touches every road when it needs to be touched. And so it's a losing game trying to climb out of this without some extra influx of cash. Fortunately, there may be an influx of cash coming soon through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In fact, I've already invested a whole employee in it. Now, so Ryan Baker, who used to be the sustainability office, is two paid positions, 2 full-time positions, and one of which, a senior planner, has accepted a new job in the planning department to focus entirely on the infrastructure bill and what funding is available, work with other departments, help coordinate the city's kind of response to this, because there are so many moving parts and so many timelines to keep track of, and we need it, like I mentioned gas tax. We get about $1 million We're also at the crossroads of I-40 and I-35, which sees a lot of truck traffic, a lot of semi-truck traffic. We get $0 in diesel tax, none. So like those trucks, diesel powered cars, all of those things are doing diesel powered cars. Listen to me, like there's a ton of those running around. The semi trucks do a substantially amount more damage to our roads than a regular car does, much less than an EV does. But we don't get any, city municipalities get nothing from diesel tax to be able to repair those. So again, long-winded way to say we get revenue from multiple streams, and sometimes that can affect the non-attainment piece that I mentioned. I don't even know if I said the words non-attainment when I was looking at it, but the air quality standard, if we go to what's termed non-attainment, meaning we exceeded that threshold, it slows down our ability. There's additional reviews, certain things we can't spend money on from that federal transportation money for anything that is emissions related, emitting criteria pollutants. Those have to go through additional reviews. Industrial permits, which Oklahoma City and Oklahoma has a lot of industrial activity. So it could really grind your community to a halt, not to a halt, but slow it down quite a bit. And another thing I strategically didn't mention, and I know Eric's going to talk about it, but ACOG did a study about the cost of non-attainment in the area, and I think it was over the course of 28 years, but the low end was like $9 billion. So going non-attainment has a tremendous amount of economic impact on Oklahoma City, which kind of ties into our ability to invest in infrastructure and spend money and all of those things.
Okay, great. Thank you for those answers, and thank you for the presentation. That was really insightful. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. But we're at about time here, so if we don't mind, we'll go ahead and launch back in. Kind of already introduced you, Eric, with the extent of my knowledge that you're with ACOG, so I will just go ahead and hand it right off.
Great, and thanks for the invite. Jake, it's been, I know you guys have been working on this for a while, so it's good to be here. And I think everybody's, I'm assuming people are coming to this with interest in learning about how to incorporate environmentalism into what you end up doing as a career, or even in your work at OU. And I'm interested too, maybe we can have some discussion about this, about the choice of the word environmentalist or environmentalism. It's a lightning rod word, I think. And but I think if you looked at it, I mean, most people, if you would to poll, the general public, everybody wants clean air and clean water. And so, whether it's the term sustainability or resiliency or thrivability, I'm trying to think of other ones that people are throwing around these days. Green business. I think I'll talk a little bit about this here in a little bit, but I'm interested in talking about that more. So the quick commercial for ACOG, Association of Central Oklahoma Governments. The quickest way I tell people to think about it is we're like a chamber of commerce for the governmental side. We're a sub-state planning agency, so we're not a state agency. We're sort of a association of local governments. So our leadership is made up of mayors, city council members, county commissioners from Logan, Oklahoma, Canadian, Cleveland, and parts of McLean County. So as a Norman resident, you guys are represented in a couple ways on our board of directors. There are 11 councils of government around the state, and so we're one of many. So the COGs were kind of set up back in the 1960s as a way to take federal funding and to disperse it on a regional basis, and with the idea being that cities and counties, know what their local issues are, know what they want to spend federal funding on. So that's kind of initially how they were set up, and but essentially when it comes down to it, we're mostly a planning agency. So there's a few main areas of our work. So I'm in the transportation planning division. So as part of that, getting federal funds and dispersing it, we have to come up with a long-range plan on a 5-year basis. And so Tio did a great job in his presentation talking about, some of all the issues that we have to think about when it comes to transportation planning. So I'll try not to repeat anything he mentioned, but, the cities, like Tio mentioned, always the number one issue is roads and quality of roads, or can I get a road out to where I am, or whatever that ends up being. But the goal, I think, is to think about our future needs. We're going to continue to grow as a region. I think we're up to 22 now, TO as a population. And so with that is going to come challenges of congestion, air quality challenges. So how do we address those things before we come about them? And I don't want to open a can here, but I assume some of you are thinking about turnpike planning, and maybe we can dive into that a little bit, although I can't speak for the agency or anyone in particular on that. But that's one approach to dealing with transportation challenges that we have. As Tio mentioned, we're as a spread out region. My day-to-day is to think about our overall fleet as a region, as a state, and how quickly can we move our overall fleet to cleaner burning fuels and to zero emission vehicles. I think first and foremost, our approach needs to be about transit, needs to be about multimodal, and improving those things over time. And ACOG is definitely a part of that regional transit authority and the planning around that. Hopefully, eventually, sometime maybe in the next 10 years, we can hop on a light rail from Norman up to Edmond, over to Yukon, and so on and so forth, over to Tinker. And that's a way that we can meet that challenge of increased vehicle miles traveled and congestion. So no technology is a silver bullet. Electric vehicles are, while it's part of the approach, it's not going to solve every problem. We mentioned, I think, the Congress for New Urbanism group that was in town this week. I think that was one of the messages that they talked about there, that, no one technology is going to solve all the problems. We're thinking about not just EV deployment, but connected autonomous vehicles. And so I think in the best case scenario, deployment of CAV technologies would hopefully drastically reduce the number of traffic fatalities and serious injuries related to vehicle crashes. Worst case scenario, connected autonomous vehicles increase vehicle miles travel, increase congestion, and contribute to air quality problems. So how do we set this up in a way as a community before the technology is deployed in mass to make sure we get the benefits of those things? So those are the type of things that we're thinking through as a planning agency. So that's sort of the transportation side. We have a public safety side, our 911 division that maintains the 911 system for all of central Oklahoma outside of Oklahoma City. So when you call 911, we have technicians that maintain that system, so your call goes to the right dispatch center. And then we have a team of GIS folks that are mapping constantly and updating addresses and plats and all that. And what's cool is there's some new technology that can get down within 8 feet of finding somebody that makes a call to 911. And so we can find you quickly and get you where you need to go. We also have a text to 911 service that we recently rolled out in the last couple of years. There's some times where people need to call 911 and they, for whatever the reason, they can't. Maybe it's a domestic violence situation, a kid, or someone that can't be on the phone. So there is that service now, and I believe we have that in Spanish as well. We have a community and economic development function. Tio talked about the importance of wastewater and water. For rural communities, it's a big challenge just to make sure that people have the drinking water they need and that the sewage systems are keeping up. And so there are opportunities to use federal money and state money to help those communities get funds to help pay for those projects that are just critical to quality of life. So we think about that. We think about economic development. What are our strengths as a region when it comes to economic development? One of the things we're working on right now is the Modern Energy Workforce Task Force. So there's a company that some of you may be familiar with that operates out of Oklahoma City called Spears New Technologies. They're a battery remanufacturing company. So they take At one time, the majority of batteries that were coming out of electric vehicles were coming to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Pretty amazing. So they test the batteries and then repackage them and either send them back to the OEMs, the manufacturer, the car companies, or they're using them for energy storage, battery backup type functions as well. So we really just kind of thought about them and how awesome they were, and we're like, okay, we want to build this workforce cluster and this company cluster around that idea. What future energy challenges and opportunities are there? So we're, there's been talk, forever about expanding beyond the oil and gas sector. And so how do we do that? And how do we do that specifically on energy? So there are definitely opportunities, and Tio talked about how we've jumped in wind. I think we're at 40% wind in Oklahoma right now. We just had the largest wind farm, I think, in the US, maybe North America even, that came online last week. And so that number is only going to increase. There are days where we're at 75% wind if the wind's blowing right. So yeah, great opportunities there. Water quality, air quality, things that don't know political boundaries, require regional cooperation. If City of Oklahoma City wants to build a new wastewater treatment plant, they want to discharge water into a creek, what does that look like? How does that impact downstream and upstream partners within the region? So Tio mentioned drought. So we're in a drought cycle right now where our numbers are getting worse. And so that puts a strain on the aquifer. That impacts how deep people have to drill to get a well and get water from a well. And so what are those conservation practices we can put into place? And Tio talked about that a little bit. So my goal is to finish up here in about 10 minutes so we can leave some questions. So I just want to hit on a couple of things that I think you can be thinking about. You guys are going to be graduating soon. I'm guessing you're thinking about grad school or you're thinking about a career. So just a couple of things that I would mention. So I'm not to get any favor or anything, but I graduated from OU in 2008. And so just within the last 10 years, the opportunities around sustainability and related topics has only grown and will only continue to grow. So no matter what you're going to be pursuing as a career, there's always going to be an opportunity to incorporate those things into what you do. So, Tio has, in addition to being the sustainability coordinator for the city, I know he's a LEED certified. I can't remember the certification, Tio, you're gonna have to help me out, but if you're going into architecture, there's a certification system for that. And you guys heard about that at your last session. Engineering, obviously, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really those things are being incorporated into different industries and types of careers now more than ever. So just to give you an example, so when I started my first real job, I joined the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce. And so I started basically as an administrative, in an administrative function. I was setting up meetings. I was getting people to meetings, that kind of thing. But I was able to, use that opportunity to learn about federal energy and environmental policy. And then, I was able to find out that, the Tulsa Chamber had members that were passionate about sustainability, and we're looking at ways that as a Chamber of Commerce, we could advance some progressive energy and environmental policy within the city. So no matter what organization you join, there are going to be those opportunities to bring in what you're passionate about when it comes to sustainability. There are things like, starting a green team with your organization, looking at specific practices within the organization. And I think as time has gone, it's proven out that doing those things within your company is ultimately going to save you money. And so I think that's why it continues to grow in that direction. I wanted to touch briefly on the issue of expertise. I think when I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do exactly. I just knew I was passionate about cleaner energy, renewable energy. There's nasty stuff that comes out of coal plants, for example, and seeing impacted communities firsthand had a really big impact on me. So knowing that, you just want to, you get out there and you want to change something. And it feels like when you're entering the workforce that it's going to take a lot of time and effort to get to be an expert in something to where you can affect change. So I would encourage you that's not necessarily the case. There's a guy that Tio and I work closely with. His name's Montel Clark. He's the energy policy director for the Oklahoma Sustainability Network. His background, he was a professional photographer, and he just became passionate about energy efficiency, air quality. And so as a volunteer, he basically started, and over the course of a couple of years became an expert in that area. And I don't feel like I'm letting any secret out here, but in Oklahoma, we need people that are passionate about these things of clean energy, the environment, and really there aren't that many people. There may be less people than you think that are so-called experts on an issue that are impacting change and making change. So in the example with Montel, he's able to work within the corporation commission and work with our utility partners to move us from, towards the last end of energy efficiency programs for utilities to somewhere in the middle, and continuing to be leaders over time. So I'd encourage you to, if you're passionate about a specific issue, and Tio talked about, the broad range of sustainability in Oklahoma, there are a lot of issues that need work, and there's a lot of aspects even within the environmental world that you can jump into and become an expert relatively quickly. And the other, it's kind of a two-edged sword. So I think one thing that in sort of the professional environmental world, got to remind yourself that, even if you think you're an expert, you need to go down to the local level and get what that experience is for all residents. And that you may think you're an expert, but you may not be. So think about that when you join the workforce as well. So I'm going to end because I think we got 15 minutes left here, and I really want to have a conversation here, what the questions are, but I do want to give a quick plug. So Green Week's coming up. I know you're probably working, some of you are working on that. So that started in 2007, the year before I graduated. So it's great to see that program continue. And I know there's, when I was at OU, I think the only environmental group was Our Earth, and I'm not sure if they're around anymore, but I know there's multiple groups that you guys can get involved with, and to see that that growth and the number of people that are involved in this is it's really exciting. So yeah, let's start. Let's ask some questions, and I'm interested what you guys want to know.
And Eric, I've just been peppering the chat with links, so I hope everyone can use those for something. But I did want to echo one point that you made about needing people that aren't just, I'm passionate about sustainability people, or my degrees in sustainability, so I work in sustainability. Like we need subject matter experts and people in various fields, industrial fields, engineering, architects, all of these things that have that underlying passion and can incorporate sustainability principles and climate adaptation and all of these things into your work as a whatever it is. So don't think that there's only here's the sustainability industry that you can get in or not be in. My story is very much like Montel's. I came out of college in 2008, was happy to have a job that wasn't like all my other friends, that was boom or bust associated. I worked for the state of Oklahoma in facilities management, no less. I came with a degree in communications to, work on energy efficiency projects and count light bulbs and figure out what light bulbs are and, which wattages are which. And back in the days of compact fluorescents, handing out compact fluorescent bulbs. So you just learn more about building systems and energy efficiency and why that made sense to me as a person. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm, I was raised that we don't waste things. Otherwise, wrath of your dad, at that point, I grew up on a ranch. You don't waste water. You don't, you turn lights off when you're done using them, those type of things. So it seemed really practical to me. But then learning about it in an urban setting, I went from working at the state and I was thinking about a portfolio of buildings to, coming to the city and all of these things across a giant city. So again, you're not going to have it all figured out in terms of the A to B path, but just stay passionate about what you're passionate about, but also like look into something you're good at and that you're going to want to do for a long time and incorporate it into that profession, because that's going to be way more impactful than trying to be another one of me.
Yeah, there's definitely comments and that I can make or questions that I can ask, but certainly I would want to open it up again if anyone in the crowd has anything they want to ask or discuss. And if not, that's okay, because I think that some of what I would want to talk about might be either things that folks out there are wondering, or just could answer some questions that they may have. I'll go ahead and mention one thing. So it's now separately something that both of you have mentioned. So when I first reached out to you, Tio, you mentioned you didn't really consider the work you do environmentalism. Likewise, Eric, you talked about that being a lightning rod word. Sorry to use the same idiomatic phrase that you used, but it is a double-edged sword. I chose that name for this series because partially in the hopes of promoting it better. I mean, on a college campus, I think that people seeing that word on a flyer, in an email or whatever is going to get more clicks, get people to read closer, get people to attend more than a more muted kind of word. So I'll admit that's like the pragmatic purpose behind the name. But additionally, the comment that I made, and I hope that for those listening, this kind of makes a connection, I guess, is that that's like exactly what we're looking for, is people who maybe don't consider themselves environmentalists, because at least my stance on it is that if at my age, as like a younger person who maybe doesn't have an exact career path charted out, doesn't have any history already within a professional setting, has those environmental concerns, wants to make an impact with regards to issues of sustainability and resiliency, all the other buzzwords, they might call themselves an environmentalist, but then they equally have this sort of disparate and not clearly connected interests. So like, not to call people out, but you mentioned people of different backgrounds. I know Riley in the call is in the Gallagly College of Journalism and wants to be a writer. I know Taylor is definitely going to want to go into actual government. I know Maddie is working in creative media production. I apologize, Zach, but I don't recall what your major was. But you have these disparate fields, and people may have an interest in this, and so that connection isn't clear. And I think if you consider yourself an environmentalist at this age, if it's something you like to read about, learn about, maybe post on social media about, whatever the maximum of your kind of efficacy is, what that looks like in action, per the name, is something like what you guys do. So even though you may not consider it that, and even if it is kind of a lightning rod word, I would say that someone who would call themselves an environmentalist, but wants to get into a field of work other than, direct social advocacy, or has other interests like architecture from the last one. This one's, government is kind of the thing here. And then the last session is, activism and academia, so research. This is that's kind of the question we're trying to answer, is how do I take me as like a 22-year-old guy who might call myself an environmentalist and turn that into a pragmatic, like action-driven, results-driven career approach where I can earn a living off of it and affect real change, I guess. So sorry to wax poetic about that, but that was kind of the question.
No, it makes total sense. And Eric, I'll just jump in real quick with something that, the part that I think makes it a lightning rod is really like the last half of that word, or last part of that word, ism, like, activist, it kind of like just brings the, and anytime, someone you consider an activist, and it's used kind of as a derogatory term these days, that it's happening blindly and you don't really know what you're doing and you don't know what you're supporting or why you're supporting it, but you're just out there because you want to say that you support it. I feel like that's the opposite of what we do. I mean, because we have to talk about the reasons we're doing things and the reasons things make sense in our jobs, particularly our jobs, because we're in government. And again, we're talking about public resources, which, you know, we need to be conservative of anyway. But when it comes to the environment, what isn't the environment? And what don't we need the environment for? I mean, like to do any of the things, commerce, you know, recreation, breathing. I mean, like you have to have a healthy environment, and that environment could be in your office right now. It could be, you know, like the environment is whatever's around you. So why wouldn't you want whatever's around you to be the best that it could be, or the healthiest it could be? You don't want to go stand next to a coal-fired power plant and hang out for any amount of time. So like, you don't want to shut the garage door and leave your tailpipe running, you know, your car running. Like all of this stuff is real. Just because it's on a larger scale, it's harder to grasp, and it's harder for people to make tangible and make it, you know, more understandable. Because, you know, the industrialization of the U.S. and of the world really has changed the way that our world is. I mean, it's changed the way the atmosphere behaves. It's changed the makeup of it. And so, of course, it's changing the way that it interacts with UV light and heat, and we're trapping more of it. And of course, all these little indicators around the world. I mean, they're not coincidence that like ice caps are melting and that sea level is rising. I mean, these things, like people way smarter than, don't take it from me. Go read the primary source data. Go look at the IPCC and like all of the actual scientists that are signing off on this thing and contributing to it. So again, you can be passionate, and you should be passionate, and you should read up on all of these things. You should know what's around you. You should know about your environment, how it works, how it's funded, why it's funded, all of those things, because it helps you be a better person and a better interactor with everyone else. But you have to take that and channel it into something, right? And sometimes maybe that's just business acumen, and translating that is, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it's a writer or whichever company you work for, or if it's an agency, figure out what makes that agency run. Figure out how they get revenue, how they work. What are the biggest challenges that organization faces? What would make that organization obsolete? And then like fight against those things, and using what you know about sustainability and what you're passionate about. You know, it may just be the bottom line. Our costs are too high. What can we do? Well, you know a few things because you've looked in, you know, energy efficiency has all these other environmental benefits, but that, you know, that can be a direct like bottom line saver 10 years down the road when, you know, prices increase and things like that. So again, just be passionate about it, learn about things, learn about what's around you and how it works, but channel it into something you're okay with doing for the rest of your life, because that's what you're going to be spending your time doing. And if that's something that makes you work in an office and you're not a person that's going to be mentally healthy going to an office every day, don't go into a field like that. You know, like now is the time. We have a system that is completely broken, to where kids, and I say kids, I use that term, you know, lovingly. You know, I was one once too, and I considered myself a kid at 18, 19. You're figuring out what you want to do for the rest of your life. So you know, you're not going to know what all the options are, and you don't have to right now. But just know that you have an eagerness to learn, not only about the environment and the things you're interested in, but you have an eagerness to learn about things you're not interested in, so that you can be a little bit better positioned to help the place that you're working for. And that is what will advance you. I mean, if you are a critical thinker and you're a strategic thinker, strategic communicator, and you can write, people will fall out of their chairs trying to hire you. So get some basic hard skills, and then like coordinate your passions into whatever you're doing. And that's how you can advance.
Yeah. I would add too that I think, you know, it's inspiring to see the current generation that's entering the workforce, because I think there's this generation is just not going to put up with certain things that maybe past generations have, and there is more of a desire to make sure that workplaces are inclusive and asking questions about why they're not. And so I think, you know, in addition to those skills that Tio mentioned, your people skills are going to also be what advances you. And that's the other thing that's, I think this generation that's coming out is is a lot better at. So, and that's generally, it's good to see progress on things, whether it's a plan coming out or, a successful project involving something. But at the end of the day, it's still about seeing, a colleague or someone you're working with succeed. And it's that day-to-day conversations that you have about what they're passionate about, and seeing them succeed is what has been since I've been a professional that I've enjoyed.
Excellent. Well, that's a tough act to follow, those couple of comments. I had some more like pragmatic questions about like federal and state money and what, just real nitty gritty type questions, but I'm not sure that they would make an interesting end cap after some of these awesome sentiments. Which in line with that, are you guys, this is kind of a good segue, are you guys comfortable with people who in the call here contacting you if they have questions later?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I think your emails are both pretty simple. I mean, you can put them in the chat if you want. Yeah, and thank you, by the way, to Maddie made a comment just about the last session and some of what got talked about there. So we appreciate that, and bringing more people into the conversation, which is some of what both of you have mentioned.
Yeah, and Maddie, that just to touch on that, that is something we've talked about very recently. We have a mentor-mentee in inclusivity and diversity group that meets around here in different groups. But that was something that came up in our most recent call was, strategic planning starts with communication, and or starts with the listening, actually. So you have to be willing to listen to anybody that's out there, and particularly people that have difficulty and barriers to getting to communicating to government before you can ever start to do anything here. So that's a really good point to make.
Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions at this time, I want to go ahead and say thank you to everybody for attending. And thank you, of course, to our presenters for all those insights. That's some really great connections that you've made between, again, your experience in the work world and academia, and with the passions that you hold regarding the environment. So hopefully those are insights that are useful to everybody and help everyone attending, again, translate those interests into action later in life.